Welcome to the Star Wars Canon Cantina, a show where we try to answer the question, who is Luke Skywalker, before the release of Star Wars Episode 9. My name is Jesse Aiken, and I'm here with my Star Wars best friend, Mike Carpenter, and we're talking about the Zahn trilogy today,
Woo!
Mike, and this
Kicking
is the
off
beginning.
the big one.
So, how are you doing?
I'm good. I just realized, we put before the release of Star Wars Episode 9 in our little intro there. So when Episode 9 comes out, are we done? Or are we going to keep going after?
Oh, we're going to keep going. It's going to be something else.
We'll have to change up the intro there. But yeah, no, I'm doing good, man.
Well, this is the big one, guys. I hope a lot of you guys that have been stuck with us this long have got to this point, and hopefully some of you guys that are listening right now are maybe new listeners, because if there's a moment in Star Wars that was really relevant for not only the canon of Star Wars back in the day, but also just the universe of Star Wars as a whole onward, it's this trilogy. And, the Zahn trilogy is written by Timothy Zahn. We like to call it the Zahn trilogy. It really should be called the Thrawn trilogy, or the Heir to the Empire trilogy, rather than the Zahn. But the Zahn's kind of becomes synonymous. That's the name of the author, and he wrote in 1991. And Mike, this was before the prequels.
Yeah, he definitely has become synonymous with Grand Admiral Thrawn. He's like the Thrawn specialist because they brought him back after the Disney acquisition to write. I forget what the first Thrawn novel was called. Thrawn, not Origins, but that's basically what it was an origin story. And then they just did the one where Thrawn and Alliances, where him and Anakin team up. Yeah.
That's right. So, as we've talked on the show a lot, there was the old EU, which then was referred to as the Legends, which is now non-canonical Legends storylines. And Thrawn was obviously a major part of this, and other characters in the Thrawn trilogy. And when Disney reset the canon years ago, it's very good that they brought Zahn right back and basically had him re-put Thrawn into the canon. And so far, Mike, it seems like what we've got with the new Thrawn stuff from Rebels in these books, Thrawn's the same guy, except where it's not post-Return of the Jedi stuff, so it's kind of hard to say.
There are subtle differences, and I'll say that I like Rebels, New Era Thrawn, a little more than the original guy. But like Jesse was saying, this came out in 1991. From the end of Return of the Jedi to 91, really all that was keeping Star Wars going in terms of books were the West End Games role-playing game books. And those were used as source material for a lot of the 90s now Legends, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and if you guys have followed us thus far, we've covered several Legends books that have led us up to this point chronologically in the storyline. And what's really interesting about this, Mike, is the Thrawn trilogy came first, and it was so successful and so rich of the new Star Wars stuff that people went back and actually filled that 5-year gap between Return of the Jedi and this. With some of the books we've done, Bakura and things like that at this point.
It makes sense because when a new film comes out, or when the prequels came out, books eventually went to the time just before and then the time just after, filling in all that stuff. So it gives you that pivotal point, and then authors expanded on the details leading up to and right after.
Definitely. Maybe Zahn was using the 5-year thing as a strategy move. He's like, well, 5 years have happened. I want to say there's a new republic established and all these things are happening, and Luke's obviously changed in different ways, and Luke and Han have resigned their military positions within the republic, which is very interesting. And I don't know, that was a good jumping off point. And Star Wars typically, I say this lightly now, but Star Wars typically has those 1 year, 3 year, 5 year gaps.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's giant gaps, and sometimes there's no gaps, like The Last Jedi. We've got new stuff. We got different jumps in time, but I think he was just kind of going off of that. But before we get into the story today, Mike, we got to talk about that this was one of the first expanding of Luke Skywalker's stories ever. And I think that's probably pretty relevant.
Oh, yeah.
As well.
Setting aside Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which obviously was never, ever canon once Empire Strikes Back came out. I have a question for you. When is the first time you read this book?
I want to say, Mike, around 94. I mean, quite a while ago.
See? And I don't know if I read this book until early 2000s, in high school, but I knew the story from the early 90s because this was one of the first Star Wars books I ever listened to on audio book. It was 4 or 6 cassettes or something, and I would just rotate through it, like listen to a side a day over and over again. So if we
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to rack your mind here at all, Mike, taking it back probably a little over 20 years for us. So definitely in late 90s, mid 90s, probably actually more than 20 years. So mid 90s. I remember at your house on the east side of town.
Oh yeah.
Swapping the tapes. We were listening to this on tape.
Yep.
Not only as a kid I had read this, but I'd also listened to it, and I was fascinated with Star Wars audiobooks because they were kind of a unknown thing to me till me and Mike were listening to them. And the idea of audiobooks being different in any way, and Star Wars audiobooks are different. They have sound effects and musical cues, and sometimes actors from the movies like Billy Dee come on. That just blew my mind.
Yeah. So if you notice later on any differences in pronunciation, I just have what I heard on that audiobook drilled into my head. It might not be correct, but it's what I remember. So it's how I'm going to pronounce things.
No, I get that too. I've got a lot of those just from reading these books so long ago. I don't even know. When we get to these other lesser known books, Mike, that we read once, well, let's see what my pronunciation on some of those are. Some wild things. But let's get into Luke stuff. There's some good stuff. Let's jump right in. With getting into the Luke stuff, we got to answer our Luke questions we ask every time. And if you guys are new at home, this is a great time to examine our questions. What state is Luke in at the beginning of this story? And what's really interesting about this, Mike, is this is a trilogy. So we can really look at this as an entire trilogy, how Luke changes his state at the beginning to the end. Also within the sub-chapters. How do the events and characters of this story impact his development as a character? And would Luke Skywalker's experiences in this story make him different from the Luke Skywalker we meet in The Last Jedi?
Which that might be our most interesting question over the next 3 weeks as we cover these parts of the trilogy, just because so many fans that did not like the Luke that they met in The Last Jedi always refer back to the Thrawn trilogy as, well, this is what things should have been. So it'll be interesting to talk about.
Well, that's true. And I also think, Mike, something I said very briefly at the last of our last episode with our special guest, Zach Bunn of Team Covenant and the Covenant cast, I mentioned that I think a lot of my perceptions of Luke and a lot of people's perceptions of Luke have been reading about him for 20 plus years in these books. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting for me to go back through these with a fresh set of eyes. Even books like the Thrawn trilogy I've read more than twice and relook at it with the Last Jedi glasses on.
Yeah.
And I'm ready for that.
All right, well, let's hop to it. Luke Q.
Ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
A lot of rumors, stories.
And I became a legend.
People that knew him best.
Luke.
Young Skywalker. Luke.
It's all true.
I am a Jedi. Like my father before me.
All of it.
All right, Mike. So this story begins not with Luke, not with Leia, not with Han, but with a new character. Actually, two new characters. So we start this book with the introduction of the Imperial Remnant, which I've mentioned now in a couple episodes, and this is going to keep reoccurring, so it's important. But they're the factions of the Empire left that are wresting control of the galaxy, maintaining their areas. You know, Mike, the Empire was really big, and they're not defeated. And we're introduced to a character called Captain Pelion.
Captain Gilad Pelion.
Yeah,
portly old man with my big old fluffy mustache, as the comics portray him.
Definitely. He has a imperial mustache, and he is a well-received and high-up imperial officer. But what's interesting, what we find out about him, he's kind of recounting the Battle of Endor and how he got out, and how the Battle of Endor would have been different if Grand Admiral Thrawn would have been there. And of course, right after this, we're introduced to Grand Admiral Thrawn as Pelion goes into Thrawn's captain's chambers. And first thing we see when Pelion goes into Thrawn's captain's chambers, which is one of the first character elements we find out about Thrawn, is his entire chambers is full of art and sculptures from different cultures. We learn that Thrawn's entire chambers is actually an empty room, but Thrawn can project anything on the walls in the way of art, culture, and actually he can project an entire representation of his bridge from his captain's chambers. First of all, we've never seen this technology in the Empire, and I guess that's something Thrawn had custom done. But we learned about Thrawn. We learned that Thrawn is a Grand Admiral that was in command of the Outer Rim and the unknown regions of the galaxy. But something relevant about Thrawn, he is a Chiss, which is a humanoid species that looks like humans, but they're blue and they have red eyes. And that's notable because Palpatine not only was racist...
He totally was. Palpatine and the old Empire were very pro-human.
Pro-human and anti-female for the most part. And
anti-female, anti-alien.
And so for a alien to make the highest rank in the Imperial Navy, which is Grand Admiral, you even get a special uniform, which is white. All your clothes are white, and you have all these special decorative things on your uniform. And to represent your Grand Admiral, it's the way they represent in the book is that it's higher than even a Grand Moff, because the Grand Moff has higher political power. So there's different things there, like Tarkin was a Grand Moff. But Pelion is actually perplexed. He's never seen Thrawn looking at art before, and Thrawn explains to Pelion that one of his greatest allies to his tactician ways is that he studies other species' art and culture. And the more he studies their art, he says you can better defeat them and understand them.
And, that seems like an inconsistency, because we're given the impression that Pelion has been with Thrawn for a while.
Months at least.
Yeah, so if the art thing is Thrawn's whole gig, why is this the first time that Pelion's hearing about it? It's not a major thing, but I just thought of it while you were describing that.
Well, I'm not sure. He basically catches Thrawn in the act. I'll call it that, because they go to the system called the They go to the Obersky system.
All those jokes alone. Okay.
They go to the Obersky system and they fight a pirate force. And Thrawn is basically studying their art, music, and sculptures, and then they battle this pirate raid from their Imperial flagship. I didn't mention yet, but Thrawn flies a Imperial-class Star Destroyer called the Chimera. Awesome name. Obviously, I have a vested interest in Greek mythology, so that speaks to me on some different level. But what's interesting is, after he's been studying this art, he immediately switches all the art to the bridge of the ship, and then proceeds to command the ship from his quarters, like I mentioned earlier, with this visual representation of the bridge, and easily defeats the pirates because he knows what their tactics are going to be via their art. And he also knows that they won't know how to deal with his military maneuvers, because he does actually some of the most basic military maneuvers ever. And Pelion is actually shocked. He's saying even some cadet would know that maneuver, and basically Thrawn catches them off because he goes so basic. It was really interesting. But then, of course, that's our introduction to Thrawn, and Thrawn's basically saying, I'm going to reunite the Imperial Remnant, and I'm going to bring down the New Republic. And they kind of show you Thrawn's military genius, and that's kind of our lead-in with him.
Yeah, so one thing we forgot to mention before we started, I didn't reread the book for this. I wanted to read the comics for the first time. I actually hadn't done that, so I went back and read them. So there's a lot to cram into 6 issues here, but
too much for 6 issues.
Yeah, there's definitely too much for 6 issues, but it started off strong. It started off with this meeting in Thrawn's chamber with the encounter about the art and everything. I will say that I like the nuance given to the Thrawn we've seen on screen with, regards to his using culture's art and everything.
100%. That's essential to me.
Yeah, and maybe just the voice, not Mads, his brother of Mads Mikkelsen, who did the voice of Thrawn. That kind of helps, I don't know, solidify the character a little bit in my mind. But yeah, this is a great introduction to Thrawn. He's definitely an Imperial that we hadn't seen before.
You're right, and he's very cultured and he's very intelligent, and we've learned that Palpatine held him in high regard, despite Palpatine's racism and hatred to have anyone in the Empire of any other sex or race than, human male. And that says a lot. And what's really interesting is, I said Pelion's having these musings at the beginning of the story about how the Battle of Endor would have gone differently with Thrawn there. And that's kind of an interesting drop-off point, because Pelion's kind of introducing the audience to Thrawn's abilities. And you're right, Mike, that voice of Lars Mikkelsen.
Yeah, there we go.
Mads' older brother. I'm a huge fanboy of Mads.
I wanted to say Lars, but I thought it wasn't. I didn't want to sound stupid, but okay.
Yeah, you're right. Lars Mikkelsen nails the voice. I mean, even the way Zahn describes Thrawn's voice is very cold and calculating, but also very soothing, and, it kind of draws you in. Very good. So, like, we're introduced to them right off the bat, and they easily defeat these pirates. And then immediately we're dropped right into Luke's perspective on Coruscant. And I got to mention, side note here, Mike, some Star Wars trivia.
Uh-oh.
The word Coruscant didn't exist prior to this book. If you knew that.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
Right. A lot of people don't know, maybe necessarily, that Zahn invented that. It just used to be called the Imperial City, the entire planet. Even in the special edition, we have Coruscant, right? At that point, it was Coruscant. But before that, no name. Just the center of the galaxy, the Imperial City. And Zahn invented the name, which I thought was great. And of course, George Lucas and, 97 onward used the word Coruscant. We had that in episode 1. We had every movie since, basically, that had Coruscant a feature.
Yeah.
And that was pretty great. And it was a Star Wars-y name, too. It's great. And it happens to be the planet in Star Wars, I would say. Like, it's probably one of the more boring planets of all things, but so much has happened.
If I had to pick
over hundreds and hundreds of years,
planet in Star
Tatooine.
Wars. Oh, well, okay, if we're talking in universe,
I would say from the films, yeah, Tatooine.
Okay, we're on the same page. Yeah. Like in universe, yeah, probably Coruscant.
In universe is Coruscant because it's the center of the galaxy. It's where the people that are in control have power. Which, Old Republic and the Jedi. Then it's the Empire. Then it's, the rebels to win and free the people. And then it becomes the New Republic. So now Coruscant is the center of the New Republic. So Luke is living on Coruscant, which is really interesting. And Luke even mentions he has unweary feelings about living on the Imperial City. So the Imperial City is the capital city of Coruscant. And Luke is approached
the capital city when the whole planet's a city.
I know. Luke is approached by the Force ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Luke gets depressed because Obi-Wan basically says, my connection to you is fading. The ability for me to reach you and give you guidance is becoming less and less. And I'm having a harder time reaching you. And this kind of sets Luke into a sadness, a depression, Mike, because Ben basically says, this is it, Luke. I don't know if I can ever reach you again. And this is kind of a severing of Luke's final tie to the old Jedi and his old masters fully. Both of them have passed away, and Luke really doesn't know any other Jedi, but he still had Ben popping in every once in a while. We even saw that in Bakura.
Yeah.
And Mendor, actually. But now Ben's saying basically the forces that have kept me here are gone, and the forces that are pulling me away are too strong. And I no longer can be a help to you, Luke. You have to become your own Jedi Knight and eventually Master. And you are a Master now, basically, is what Obi-Wan says. And he says, basically, take care of the Jedi. And that's it. And Leia senses Luke
just one small thing.
Force.
Take care of the Jedi. You got this.
It's just you right now, but nurture that. No pressure. And Leia feels this in the Force, which is really interesting. So in this book, we're introduced to Leia having the Force, but not really in really prevalent ways. Mike, I'm not sure how the comic represented it, but in the book, it's not super prevalent. And I got to mention, Mike, this time around, I did revisit my 1993 copy, which smells like a library. It's older than my sister. I just realized that the other day. It made me feel a little old.
Oh, God.
I have books older than my sister, who I'm 10 years older than and is in her 20s, approaching. Yeah. Anyways, we're old, but we've been reading Star Wars a long time. So I did some of that, but I also did the new audiobook on audible.com. And this is not an ad for Audible because we're not cool enough to have that.
Sponsor us, Audible.
I listened to the 20-year anniversary of this, and it was narrated by Mark Thompson, who's kind of the new go-to Star Wars voice guy.
He absolutely is the go-to guy.
I listened to the Kenobi book by him and was blown away. But that's another story for another time. So Leia senses Luke in the Force feeling this pang of despair, and she reaches out to him through 3PO and R2, because R2's with Luke, of course. And she kind of consoles Luke via 3PO. Because 3PO is over there, and she calls 3PO and says, please take care of Luke. I'm worried about him. And at this point in the story, we're introduced to Han and Leia. And Han is trying to get smuggler contacts for the New Republic. He's trying to get ships and smugglers that'll work for the New Republic under the orders of Admiral Akbar. Now, at this point, Mike, I've got to mention the story. Luke and Han have both forsaken their military titles Luke especially. Luke's actually very adamant about that he's given this away, which I think is a really cool consistency from Mindor, because Luke obviously in that was like, I'm revoking everything from this point on. I'm just a Jedi. I'm not a military, because, in that book, Luke had thousands of people die under his command, and then thousands of innocents die from a conflict he was in. And Han's done the same thing. Han's just back to being a smuggler, but Leia's heavily invested. And, so that's what Han and Leia are doing, and we won't dwell too much on that, but Han's meeting with several smuggler contacts, some good smuggler interactions in cantinas. At this point, we're also introduced to Borsk Phalia.
Yep.
So, Mike, you want to talk about him?
I remember it being pronounced. Yeah. So,
that's correct.
So Borsk Phalia is a Bothan. If you want to check out the Twitter account, Is It a Bothan? It's really funny.
Oh,
but he is a Bothan, the same type as our fallen hero Manny, who obtained the plans to the Death Star. But he is a rival politician to Leia and Akbar, essentially, who
definitely
is introduced here, who will become eventually the head of the New Republic. I would say spoiler, but yeah, he's going to be here for a while.
What's interesting about him is this is the first of new characters after Thrawn and Pelion that Zahn has created that are not going anywhere, Mike, for some time. And Borsk, he wants different things for the New Republic than Leia and Akbar want. So basically, Leia and Akbar and Mon Mothma butt heads with Borsk all the time. And he's basically trying to get control of the New Republic from them, even though clearly Akbar and Mon Mothma are in charge, right, with Leia with them. And he wants that from them. So that's relevant of him. We're going to see a lot more of him in the future. This is the first episode with him, so I think it's pretty relevant for us. But let's go to some other new characters, Mike. So then we go to a planet called Myrkr, Myrkr. And this is a pretty prominent planet in the Legends storyline. Obviously, it was introduced in 91 with this story, but it comes back again in the future. But
does it? Oh, I don't remember that. I only thought it was in this one.
Well, we'll get there.
Wait, no, I think I'm sort of remembering things now. You triggered some neurons to start firing.
And you can't forget the Islamari too, but we'll get to that.
And that's
And obviously we go back to Myrkr just to get the Islamari all the time, but which is whatever. So we're introduced to two new characters and an animal that are important. So we're introduced to Talon Card, who is a smuggler type character that is a weird mix of Han, Lando, Dash, maybe a Heir, not much. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. He's more of a, if he's kind of more like light side Shizor, if there's such a thing.
That's fair. He's described as very.
If you guys listen to our Shadows episode, that Shizor and that.
He's described as like very smooth, but also very capable and intelligent, and he's kind of the new big name since Jabba met his untimely end.
Perfect segue, Mike. Yeah.
Here's a comics thing.
Oh no.
So with the audiobook description, you picture somebody sort of well put together.
Definitely.
The comic was.
He's very cultured too. He's very Lando-esque.
Yeah, he looks like 90s Kraven the Hunter. He is basically shirtless with a brown vest, and he's got the long hair, half mullet thing. It's either a tan shirt and a brown vest, or he's just on there shirtless. Like it's not good.
Did you just say long hair mullet? Really?
Like it's not consistent. It's like, is it long hair or is it a mullet? Is what I meant.
See, Zahn in the book says, I can tell you because I just read it and listened to the audiobook. Zahn says he has tightly cut hair that's clearly cut often.
Yeah,
like he keeps up with his haircuts.
That is definitely not the case in the comic book. Like
so I was thinking like a fade with some longer length on top, but really, like tight. Real tight on the sides.
He almost looks like a pro wrestler from the 90s in the comic.
Oh my. And any of you Game of Thrones fans at home, I know Mike isn't one, but the new audiobook, the 20th anniversary, makes him kind of have a voice like the Viper. It's kind of like a smooth Spanish voice, Mike. That's what the guy chooses in the audiobook, the new audiobook, which I think is fairly fitting. Like kind of like a Lando mixed with a Western Spain kind of accent. I thought that was kind of cool with him. So we're introduced with him. And we're also, and he has quite an operation on this planet Myrkr. He has some ships. He has a ship called the Wild Card.
Get it? Right? It's his name.
The Wild Card.
The Wild Card is like the ugliest looking ship.
Oh yeah, it's a freighter through and through.
It looks like a dust buster.
But he has that, and he also has a second in command, and her name is Mara Jade. And if that doesn't ring a bell for you guys at home, I'm very excited to bring her up because this is obviously something, Mike, that we're not going to get away from for the rest of this podcast. I mean, because of Luke Skywalker.
Despite my best efforts.
You cannot tell me you dislike Mara Jade.
Yes, I can.
Dislike.
Yeah.
Actively dislike. I'm gonna try to
passively.
find
Passively.
Oh, passively. Okay. Even later on, Mara Jade too, man. Okay, well we're gonna this is what's great about this, Mike. We're gonna read all this text, and your level of dislike's gonna go up and down. I hope.
So far, it's just been up.
Well, Mara's gonna go away for a while. Actually,
she does. You're right.
Now I think about it, and she's gonna come back when Star Wars really tries to home in on the just the group of main characters. But Mara Jade's in it. And we don't know much about her at the beginning of the story. I'm actually going to save that for the end, Mike, because when it comes in the story, but we know she's a smuggler. She helps Talon Card. We know that she's highly trained and she's very beautiful. She has red hair and green eyes, a slender figure is the way the book describes her. And that even Talon Card, who's a Lando type guy, has never figured her out. And he's been working with her for years. She's got a history and a past that he's never figured out. He says she can pilot any ship better than any of his best men. She's also I'm not going to say a bodyguard, but they've been in smuggler situations where him and her have had to fight side by side, and she's proven herself to him, and he's impressed with her. Now, the last character we're going to introduce is the animal I mentioned, which is a Ysalamiri, which is a half rat, half snake, half lizard, salamander thing. And these aren't actually that relevant at this point in the story until, Mike, Thrawn shows up on Talon Karad's door. Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera, shows up and basically with Talon tells him he's interested in these creatures. And these creatures are important for a particular reason, Mike. We learn they're important. Thrawn wants them because Thrawn has heard that they have the ability to push back the Force. Not nullify the Force entirely. If you're outside of their range, the Force is fine. Yeah, but if you're by them...
It's often described as like an anti-Force bubble.
They said it's like... Zahn describes it as a large bubble of air pushing through water. These Ysalamiri are important because Thrawn shows up at Karad's door and says, I want these creatures from your planet. And Karad, being the smuggler he is, says, oh, take what you want. We're friends with the Empire, you know? And he says, but that comes with a price. And Thrawn's like, what's the price? He's like, I'll tell you all about him because you could easily kill him. And he kind of plays Thrawn a tiny bit, but Thrawn's not really... He's seeing through his lies.
Thrawn
he says basically
somewhat allows himself, allows Card to think that, yeah.
He's like, you have to take the trees with them, or at least have to keep them on trees. You can't just grab them off trees. They're prone to shock and death and all these things. So he basically teaches Thrawn's men how to get these creatures off the planet Merkur, and they go get them, these little lizard guys, and they get these lizards on these trees, and they bring them on Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera. And you know, Karad has no idea why they want these. He's had inclinations that these did something important, but he didn't really know what these creatures did. And of course, Thrawn's done his history track and knows all about this. Now, why would Thrawn want these? You're thinking right off the bat, to fight Luke, right? Well, not really, actually. So Thrawn actually wants these Ysalamiri that push back the Force because Thrawn wants to go to a planet to visit one of the Emperor's hidden away storehouses. And you know, this is something that we might see a lot in the Legends, and I think the canon, Mike, is this is something we see in Star Wars Battlefront, which we have an episode off in the future about.
Oh yeah,
the Emperor had a hidden storehouse on a different planet with artifacts and weapons
in this book.
Yeah, and in Battlefront it's the same way.
Is next to planet Yutani. Nothing.
Nice.
I gotta look. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as I look over at my glass cases of aliens over here. Yeah, so they go there and they encounter a new character. And when I say they, I mean Thrawn, Pelion, and his stormtroopers. We're moving through the plot pretty quickly here, but this is important because the Chimera goes to this planet and they want to access the Emperor's storehouse.
Storehouse on Mount Tantus.
And they get, of course, sniped at and attacked by the people there. And Thrawn, of course, being the awesome guy he is, I picture him drinking a glass of wine while he's doing this. He's just walking into this place.
Always walking around with them.
I've always thought of him as that. Just sitting in his chair with a glass of wine, looking at the art, swirling it around. But he's shot by a sniper. And of course, Thrawn's men freak out, along with Pelion. But of course, Thrawn wore full body armor under his tunic because he's Thrawn.
In the comic, he's not shot. It's like a near miss or something.
There's a change of the comic right there. That's very interesting. And Thrawn basically says, bring out your leader. And this new character comes out. Mike, who is that?
He's got one of the most confusingly spelled names in the old expanded universe. The audiobook described it as Joris Saboth, and that's what I've gone with. But I'm sure there are like 30 different good pronunciations.
Right, and that's the original audiobook from 92, I think. So that's the one that Mike and I listened to till the cassettes were out. I listened to the 20-year audiobook this year, and it was Joris Sabaoth.
Yes, good old Joris.
So it's interesting. And you're right, I think he refers to himself as Joris, but we'll get into his character in a second. But basically, Thrawn talks him down. Now, what's interesting here is, I haven't mentioned this yet, but Thrawn obviously has the battle armor on under his tunic, so he's less threatened in that way. But Thrawn also has a small tree branch with the Ysamari with him, also several with his stormtroopers, because he heard that this guy potentially was a dark Jedi, or a Jedi of some kind.
Yeah, so in the comic, Saboth tries to shock him with Force lightning, and it fizzles out when it reaches the edge of the bubble.
It's exactly what happens in the book. And Sabaoth is, his mind is kind of blown. That's never happened to me before.
Oh, the comic definitely plays up the crazy in Saboth.
He's super crazy.
Yeah.
And what's really crazy about him, which I really like, Mike, is he actually calls himself a Jedi Master. He doesn't call himself a Sith. He doesn't call himself, I don't know, a Force wielder or a Dark Jedi, which is really kind of what he is. He's a Dark Jedi. He's not a Sith. He's not a Jedi Master, but to us as an audience, he's a Dark Jedi, especially now with our knowledge of Star Wars. But in 91, he's like, I'm just a crazy Jedi Master.
Yoda was crazy. You liked him. Why won't you like me?
Yeah. But he's obviously using dark side powers. He's trying to kill people. He's trying to break people's neck with the Force. He's trying to lightning shock people like Palpatine did. So he's different than we've seen. Thrawn basically works out a deal with him. Long conversation with him and Thrawn, where it's a battle of wits. He basically says, Thrawn says, you can't hurt me, and I will tell you why I could fend off your attack if you do some things for me. I need you to come with me. I need you to join the Empire. And in return, because I know you want Jedi pupils one day, I will give you the future children of Leia Organa, because she is now pregnant.
With twins.
Yeah, with twins. And of course, we haven't mentioned this yet in the story, but I'll mention it now. Leia is pregnant with twins, and Thrawn has spies all of Coruscant, of course, and Thrawn has become privy to this information. So he kind of lures Joris in with this information. He says, and maybe one day I'll get you Skywalker as well. And this lures the crazy old man in. So now we have a crazy dark Jedi old man with Thrawn.
Yeah, and he looks like, in the comic, sort of like the crazy old white-haired guy, I want to say in like the Sword in the Stone Disney cartoon. Yeah. That kind of like crazy old long beard type guy.
Yeah, he's wearing like kind of raggy robes, and he's actually on the cover art of the book, if you remember, Mike. He's the very iconic cover art. A lot of these early Legends books, and they continued this trend for a long time. They have kind of movie poster art on them, which is the stylized 1970s, 80s paintings of different characters. And he's actually the most prominent part of the whole picture. But something I haven't mentioned yet, Mike, about Thrawn, how could I forget an important character? The Nogri.
I was wondering when you were going to bring them up.
Ryuk especially, which is Thrawn's personal, highly trained Nogri, basically the strongest of all the Nogri. Thrawn has a Nogri that protects him at all times called Ryuk. Ryuk actually goes and kills that sniper that I mentioned a couple minutes back. Mm-hmm. The Nogri are a new race we're introduced once again in this book. They are gray-skinned, humanoid, orc-looking kind of guys that are really short compared to humans. They're not super short, but compared to humans, they're much shorter, and They are trained humanoid assassins that are basically ninjas.
Yeah,
for Star Wars ninjas.
The comic interpretation of the Nogri is one of my least favorite things about it.
Oh, tell me about it.
Grayish skinned, and I guess they sort of look orc-like, but they're much bigger than they're described in the books, and they just look sort of cartoony compared to the rest of the art in there. Not a fan of the way they were characterized, and they all have like like the warrior top knot kind of deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've just seen other interpretations in video games or whatever that I liked better.
Yeah, and now Star Wars Rebels, right? I got to mention that Ryuka's in that.
Oh, yeah, he is in that.
And he's played by the...
Is that Rook? It is Rook, yeah.
Rook is in that, and he's played by the Star Wars legend Warwick Davis. He was bugging Filoni. He was bugging Filoni for years to be in one of Filoni's shows. The play's like, I'll have a good role. And when Rebels came around, I think he really bugged Filoni, and he's like, "Oh, I got a role for you, man."
Yeah, I had totally forgotten that the Nogri were in Rebels, and in the comic, they look nothing like the Rebels version. I would take the Rebels version every time.
Yeah, the Rebels version kind of nailed the book version in my mind. They're much shorter, gray with the kind of ridged head, a little bit orc-looking face, and the sharp teeth. But yeah, they are highly trained assassin warriors, like Mike and I said. We're kind of like ninjas. And Thrawn has one all the time around him. So much so that first time we're introduced to Thrawn, Pelion is approached by Ryuk from the shadows, making sure Pelion's not an assassin for Thrawn. And Ryuk kind of vets Pelion. And that opening scene we mentioned earlier, where Thrawn's looking at the art with the wine glass. But they're going to come into the story in a little bit, but just know that Thrawn has them in his command. And so after Thrawn gets Jeruus on his team, Leia is sent on a diplomatic mission to Bimasari, which is a planet that we haven't really seen before. And Leia is going to parlay and have a diplomatic relationship with these kind of bird people on this planet.
The Bims.
I don't know if the Bims are canon anymore, Mike, but they show up in the books a little bit over the years.
I don't think so, but they might be.
They might be. I definitely know they're probably in the RPG and things like that.
It wouldn't surprise me if they are, but I don't think they are currently.
Now, what's interesting about this story, as they're having these diplomatic relations with the Bims, Han and Leia they are attacked by the Nogri because Han recognizes the creatures coming to attack Leia. And we realize that Thrawn is sending Nogri all over the galaxy to find Han and Leia and capture her and bring her to Jeruus so he can have those twins, right? And follow through with his deal with Jeruus, even though he has Jeruus under control with these Ysamari. And Han decides to suspend the negotiations and get out of there. And Han just takes her right out of there. Yeah. And Akbar agrees with this decision, even though Borsk, again, the Bothan guy we mentioned earlier, Phalia, is super against this and was really angry they left the planet despite the presence of assassins on the planet. And at this point, Thrawn starts attacking the New Republic on small missions. He starts hitting little supply bases and things like that. So Han and Leia leave, and they go decide to visit Lando to get away from this situation. But at the same time, Mike, we have an important part about Luke here. So Luke feels the call of the Force lead him to Dagobah, back to Dagobah.
Yep.
And this is pretty important because you got to think about the context of this story. 91, a long time before the prequels and more knowledge of the Jedi stuff. And Zahn is trying to fill out more of Luke's Jedi story, which I think is really interesting. So, yeah.
So this is Luke's third trip to Dagobah, first time back since Return of the Jedi, right?
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. And he actually talks about how he's in his X-Wing with the R2 a lot in this book, Mike, and this is the first time of many he's in his X-Wing with R2, and he's kind of recanting Yoda's words in his mind. He's reliving the teachings of Yoda. And basically, Luke goes to Dagobah, and he feels the call of the Force. He goes to Yoda's hut. He doesn't really find anything, but then he goes to the cave because he feels the call of the dark side cave again. And anyone that's a big Star Wars fan knows the relevancy of the cave when it's a strong presence of the dark side. And something, Mike, I didn't remember about this book, but there's recesses of knowledge in my mind. I don't know where they come from. One of them came from this book. Luke, being a new fully realized Jedi now, can really feel the power of the cave and how full of the dark side it is. He never could feel that before, which I think is cool. And he realizes that Yoda was using this as a way to hide from the Emperor. And he describes it as two polarizing ends of a battery canceling each other out. Yoda being a really strong force of the light and the cave being a really strong force of the dark kind of makes Dagobah like nothing on the scale of the Force. And that's something that's kind of been common knowledge of Star Wars fans, I feel like, for quite a long time. And I think people forget it comes from this book. So that's kind of interesting. Luke kind of figures that out with the audience in this book. Luke goes into the cave because he feels the call. And he has his a vision again. And the vision this time is Luke on the sail barge at Jabba's palace being pushed into the pit of Carkoon, the Sarlacc pit. And R2 shoots his lightsaber out. R2 misses. And his lightsaber is caught by a dark silhouetted woman laughing at him. And Luke falls into the pit and dies, and all of Luke's friends die with him. Symbolic of what we've seen in the cave of the past.
Little dark.
And we don't know who this woman is either, which is really interesting. Little dark, though. You're right.
Well, at this point, in the comics we do. We've met Mara. It's the same person.
Because you've seen her face.
Because you've seen her face in the comic, exactly.
Well, in the book, though, they say her face is completely silhouetted in shadow. So I don't know if that was a decision in the comic to speed things along or what. Right. We can assume it's Mara now that we've been introduced to a new female character. Maybe it is. Then Luke goes back to Yoda's hut, and he actually finds an electronic device in the hut. And we're led to believe this is some sort of Jedi artifact, but at the time, Luke doesn't know what it is, and he leaves.
Takes it with him, but he leaves.
Yeah, takes it with him, of course. And then Han and Leia go meet Lando, and now Lando, Mike, is in a mining business, right? Another mining business. This is a little different, though.
Yeah, have you seen the movie Sunshine?
Of course. I love it. I really like Danny Boyle a lot.
It's definitely a movie worth checking out, but Lando's planet is so close to the sun, they have to have these shield ships that are just basically big umbrellas that
100%.
Other ships have to fly into the shadow of. This part was cool. Just describing Nklon, Nkklon or something like that. One of the weirdest.
Nklon.
Yeah.
Nklon. The way Mark Thompson said on the audiobook, it almost sounded like Mimban. And I literally stopped and I looked around wait, was Mimban in this book from Solo? And then he said Nklon, but it sounded really fast like Mimban.
And whoever read the one I first remember listening to said it New Kylon, which was totally different from how it's spelled.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is like Nklon. It sounded like Mimban from Solo. And you're right. Lando has some pretty advanced technology. He has these mole winder machines, which are highly advanced ships, which can burrow into planet-side and asteroid things in space and bring out materials.
Yeah, they're just tiny ships with very powerful plasma jet drills.
Now, it's really interesting. Mike mentioned this early in the story. Talon Karrde has now taken over kind of as the leader of a lot of the smuggler stuff that Jabba used to run. And Lando and Han figure this out, and they go decide to meet with him to discuss the things I mentioned earlier in the story where the New Republic is trying to get smugglers to better the New Republic shipping, cargo, and all that stuff. But at the same time, Han and Lando concoct a plan to hide Leia from the Empire because they know Leia is under attack by these ninja orc warriors called the Nogri. What they do is they decide to send Leia with Chewbacca in Lando's iconic ship, the Lady Luck, which is a luxury liner ship, which is very prominent in Legends. Just to give you an idea what it's like, bigger than the Falcon, longer than the Falcon. I'm not sure it's wider than the Falcon. And it's it's kind of like those Hutt luxury cruisers. If you've ever seen the Hutt luxury cruisers, there's one in the Star Wars X-Wing game. But Lando's has been highly modified. It's been classed up and cultured and is beautiful in a very typical Lando sense.
Of course.
And
so many cape rooms on the Lady Luck.
Yeah, cape rooms, guest rooms, wine rooms, I'm sure, everything. And they decide to dock the Lady Luck and the Falcon, sneak Leia and Chewbacca on the Lady Luck, and bring Han and Lando onto the Falcon and change ways. Now, the way that this is really sold to the Empire, because then the Empire is monitoring them, Lando downloads a program into 3PO, which I thought was an interesting sort of tie to Lando we see now in canon, which I think they're going to continue to expand, I'm sure, with the droid stuff, right?
Definitely.
And L3 and everything. But Lando basically makes a mod on 3PO where 3PO, with his 7 million forms of communication, you would think he could do this. It actually makes sense. Good on Zahn, where he emulates Leia's voice. And they basically make several transmissions to the New Republic via 3PO, pretending to be Leia. As Leia and Chewbacca on the Lady Luck fly to Kashyyyk, which is the Wookiee homeworld. So once again, Mike, we're going to mention another prominent thing in the story that Zahn has added to the Star Wars universe, which has not gone away, which is the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, the Wookiee language of Shriwook, which has not gone away, and several things like that. But Chewbacca basically has the mission of flying Leia to Kashyyyk and keeping care of her with the Wookiees. And I thought that was pretty cool, kind of smuggler bait and switch thing that Han and Lando did here.
It definitely was. I'm glad we got to see Kashyyyk.
Yeah, they're on their way to Kashyyyk, and Luke at this point leaves Dagobah. Luke almost gets caught from another new thing that Zahn introduces, which is the Imperial Interdictor Star Destroyer, which is a Star Destroyer that can pull things out of hyperspace via tractor beam, basically. And the simplest way, we have a cool pilot moment with Luke.
If you've seen Star Wars Rebels, you've seen interdictors. They were in some of the later seasons.
Yeah, they're canon, of course. They're in a lot of the video games and board games now. They've been in the video games for years. They were in Star Wars X-Wing and TIE Fighter.
Interdictors are a narrative way to keep people from just always escaping to hyperspace.
Yeah, so Luke gets pulled out. Him and R2 have a little fun pilot stint, and Luke actually ends up doing a thing that we see in a lot of Star Wars stuff from here on out. What is it, Mike?
So another narrative device that Thrawn, I'm just going to call Zahn Thrawn from now on. Another narrative device that Thrawn, I said it again, that Zahn creates is basically how to get around tractor beams. Luke shoots his proton torpedoes along the path of the tractor beam emitter. And he guides it a little bit with the Force. But eventually other people can do it too.
Not just Jedi.
Wedge and Rogue Squadron and everybody who has proton torpedoes can just trick the tractor beam into pulling the torpedoes in so that it disrupts the signal and the ship can get away. It's neat the first few times you used it, but as we go through all of these Legends books, it becomes a little much.
Right, especially because Luke was the first one to do it, which makes more sense. So Luke escapes from Thrawn's Imperial ships this way, but then, of course, his X-Wing has problems in hyperspace. He goes into one of our first, we've seen Jedi sleeps, Jedi trances, if you want to call it.
Jedi nap.
And he tells R2 to wake him with anything important. R2, of course, wakes him not long after. And Luke is actually by Merkur, which is where we've been introduced to Talon Karrde and Mara, and they pull him aboard their ship.
Yep. The wild card.
Yeah. Mara basically has a conversation with Luke over the comms. She's like, we charge a lot for towing, and all this stuff. And Luke's like, I'll pay it, whatever. And she's like, we charge a lot. And he's just like, the New Republic will pay it. They find out who Luke is, and they capture him. Mara has a unbelievable hatred for Luke that we don't know what that's about. Neither does Talon. And he's kind of confused by it. But, to speed things along, at this point, Han and Lando actually meet with Talon. Like I mentioned earlier, they found out that he was the new source that replaced Jabba. And now they're on the ship. But Luke is actually captured in the hold below because Talon and Mara have captured Luke. And Luke and R2, of course, escape like they do. And I find this pretty inventive, Mike. Luke and R2 actually pool their resources. Luke takes one of the reverse power converters out of his hand to short circuit the security door.
Yeah, it's the help of the first and maybe only time we see him use the actual robotics that are part of his body.
Right.
In a way other than intended. He definitely voided the manufacturer's warranty by using it in a way other than intended.
Yeah. He definitely did. And Luke escapes, and Mara pursues him because she is like, oh, he's not escaping from me. And Karrde says, get her. At this point, of course, Thrawn is still here. He's in the system where they were getting the Ysamari and Jeruis. And Thrawn insists on sending stormtroopers to help find this escaped prisoner because, of course, Talon lays the story to Thrawn. Well, we just had an employee, a disgruntled employee who stole some ships from us and some cargo.
He's trying to cover.
I'm sending my second in command to capture this person. And Thrawn's like, oh, I'll help you. Because Thrawn has an inkling there's more than just a disgruntled employee sort of situation. Thrawn even's thinking that it could potentially be someone of high importance because he's Thrawn and has his Sherlock Holmes tendencies.
And Thrawn is a bad guy Mary Sue at this point. He is infallible and sort of all-knowing.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah. I'm not saying the character as a whole is that, but at this point, he's anticipated.
My only pushback on that is at this point maybe, but my only pushback to that would be is not everything goes right for him. It's just that his use of deduction is usually right, and in that way, he's kind of a trump card sort of Sherlock Holmes type character,
right? But even in the
but even things go wrong for him. Things go wrong for him.
They haven't yet, but we are still in the first chapter here. But just to illustrate my point about how he's sort of all-knowing, during that torpedo trick,
we're in the second act now. You're good.
Well, no, I meant of the. We're still in the first book, is what I meant.
You're right.
During that torpedo trick, Thrawn knew that by doing that, Luke would have damaged something on the X-wing, and he would only be able to stay in hyperspace for a certain amount of time. Like, oh, sure. Of course you knew that. It's a little much, is all I'm saying. Like, I'm fine with him being this very threatening, very intelligent bad guy, but sometimes it's like, okay, he's the Mary Sue of bad guys.
That's true, but I feel like we're also selling him a little short because this book basically gives the most screen time to Thrawn and Luke, even though it gives a lot to everybody else too. I will mention, but you're right. Thrawn does have an extensive knowledge of even ship functions so much that it seems excessive. But, the way we're led to believe his mind is kind of just like he has a prophetic memory.
And I get that he's a genius and everything, but
he is a genius.
We're pushing on... We're pushing the realm of believability on revisiting this story 15 years later, or however long it's been since I looked at it last.
What I do find interesting about Thrawn is he's the only person that respects the fact that Luke is a Jedi. He basically redoes the math with everything with Luke because he says, well, he's a Jedi, so he could stay in hyperspace longer than someone else with their X-wing that went out of function. And the rest of his men look at him like he's crazy. He says, no. You don't understand. A Jedi can slow their heartbeat. They can breathe less. They can meditate and kind of draw out time a little bit more than an average man. And they say, how do you know this? And he says, well, I encountered the Jedi basically in the prequel era. And then we're kind of given a tidbit of that. He said he dealt with a task force of Jedi in the unknown regions called the Outbound Flight, which I'm sure we'll touch on in the future, Mike, briefly at least.
More than briefly.
Yeah. And
not the book.
That's all we're told about, which is really interesting. So Luke, of course, is shot down by Mara, and he lands on Merkur, and he's captured by Mara. She takes his lightsaber. That's kind of an interesting part of the book, Mike, where Mara and Luke have to work together.
But she doesn't
because they're in
like
this
it.
jungle. She does not like it at all, and Luke is kind of Luke about it. He's like, we have to do this to survive. We're in this predatory jungle. This sort of swamp rainforest biome that's full of predatory creatures called Voxners and things like that. I haven't mentioned that yet, but
Vornsker, as they're pronounced in my head.
Right. Well, the Vornskers, Voxner, they even Talon has two as pets that he said he took many years to domesticate, which I think is pretty interesting. But to sum up their story, Luke is like, "What? Why do you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you?" And she said, "You ended my life. You changed the path of my life forever." And Luke's like, "What does that mean?" And basically through like a week of them surviving in the jungle together.
Yeah, I think it's like a 3-day trek from where they crashed to where they're trying to go, yeah.
Yeah. Like Luke realizes that she was actually on Jabba's palace. She
undercover
was,
as a dancer.
Undercover as a dancer, and that she was basically sent there to watch him and eventually kill him. and then Luke finds out that she was an undercover agent of the Emperor called the Hand of the Emperor.
The Emperor's Hand, yep.
Which is like a special agent for the Emperor. And Vader didn't even know that she existed. In fact, she doesn't respect Vader at all. She said Vader was a traitor. Vader was borderline insubordinate and a mutiny at the times he was under Palpatine's command, which I think is really interesting. It kind of paints a picture that Mara might have seen times of Vader struggling with Palpatine's control over him.
Now, here's something for you, Mara. If you were good at your job and you completed your mission, maybe Luke wouldn't have altered the path of your life if you had actually been able to do something at Jabba's palace.
That's true. And she even says something very plain in that story. Luke says, then what happened? like Luke's just very straight with her, and she says, I was part of the contingent that Jabba didn't allow to go on the execution excursion. I was left at the palace. I had no way to leave. And meanwhile, you slaughtered Jabba and all the rest of his men, and I was stuck at the palace, failed my mission. So she has all these regrets.
The regrets are definitely left out of the comic version, even though these comics are so bad, it's like reading full like walls of text with blurry characters in the background. But that detail was left out.
Does the wall of text not help flesh it out at all? Maybe not.
No, because you're supposed to figure out who's talking to who and talking about who when it's the visuals don't imply that when there's more than two people, you know?
Man. So Luke finds out that she was basically trained by the Emperor. He doesn't know the full extent of her powers, but he knows she has an understanding of the Force. Mara, being in control of Luke's lightsaber, uses it several times during this. She used it to cut down trees and brush and things like that. And Luke's saying he's never seen someone have such command of a lightsaber before other than, you know, his master, Ben Kenobi. So,
will you be my master now?
Yeah, he's kind of confused by all this, even though she wants to murder him. And eventually Luke and Mara get caught by Thrawn's stormtroopers. And Luke pretends to be Talon's right-hand man. He pretends to be Jade.
Yeah,
he says,
basically,
I'm Jade.
Talon leaves through a convoluted way. He leaves them a voicemail saying, "Hey, why don't you switch roles? Because I never specified that my second in command was a woman."
Right, trying to reach out to.
Well, and not only that, but Luke disguises his face, or Mara disguises his face by picking up some. I thought this was in the book. I sort of remembered it from being in the book. Basically they give him poison ivy over like half of his face to disguise the fact that he is Luke Skywalker, somebody whose face has been all over the
Oh
campus.
no, that's not in the book, but it's in the book. Him and Mara get attacked by a Vorksker or whatever.
Pick a pronunciation, yeah. But by
Voxner.
But by one of those things.
Luke gets lashed in the face by the tail because Luke, of course, has no weapons because he's Mara's prisoner. And but Luke does defeat it because he eventually pulls the lightsaber to him and cuts it in half. And Luke, being the Luke he is, he hands his lightsaber over to Mara, back to her. So that's how Luke's face gets messed up in the book. I don't know.
So that's different, but he ends up with a disguised face, sort of.
That's kind of lame, though.
Oh, the comic is super lame.
In the book, it was a happenstance, you know? It was like...
Comic is super lame, and I'll go ahead and say that it definitely stuck out here. Comic is super gory, too. Like, lightsabers and blasters causing blood explosions, like fighting these Vornskers and everything. It definitely doesn't fit with Star Wars. It's very 90s. It's a little unsettling now, honestly. It's like, I'm not reading Deadpool here.
But they get captured by stormtroopers, and of course, at this point, we go back to Leia, and she is on Kashyyyk. And, you know, I wish I could spend more time on this, but I'm not going to, Mike. But basically, on Kashyyyk, she meets the Wookiee representative, and...
We have to at least talk about the representative.
Okay.
The name escapes me. I left my iPad upstairs.
Me too.
But this Wookiee is able to speak Basic.
Poorly, but he can.
And then Leia turns to Chewie, maybe my favorite line of the
it's so good.
You've had a speech impediment this whole time.
And you haven't told me? And Chewie just laughs. And the representative says, no, Chewbacca in fact speaks great, if not one of the best of our tribes. Apparently,
Chewie's all the words, speaks all the good words.
The good words. Apparently, Chewie is very eloquent in his speaking, and this guy actually he says, "I'm the one who has a speech impediment."
I like the line, but having a Wookiee speak half Shriwook,
what's like half Shriwook, half Basic.
It's
okay. I don't know.
It fits right in there.
Could a Wookiee's tongue form basically Wookiee sounding basic words? That's the question.
I'll say it fits right in there with Han suddenly being able to speak bad Shriwook in the Solo movie. It's a little...
Yeah, it does. He speaks poor Basic. Han speaks poor Shriwook. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
It's not like a deal breaker that yanked... Yeah, I know. It's just like, come on.
But a lot of world building with Kashyyyk, and we can't go into this too much, but basically Leia learns that the Wookiees are very at home with technology, even though they have more basic cities built up in the trees. The trees are bigger than anything you can ever understand.
The trees cover the planet because it's Star Wars, where you have one ecosystem per planet. Coruscant is the city. Kashyyyk is the forest planet.
It's fantasy, man. You got to go to the lava place.
I'm not hating on it. It's
fun,
reverent Star Wars joke at this point.
Yeah, but Leia is not even really ready for the scale of things on Kashyyyk because she even thinks that the Lady Luck's not going to fit on the platform, and the Lady Luck eventually lands, and she realizes that 20 Lady Lucks could fit on the platform where they land because the trees are so big it makes the city look small, But basically, Leia and Chewbacca get attacked by the Nogri on Kashyyyk. And one of the Nogri actually, after Leia does some semi-Jedi things, I'm sure in the comic it was more stylized, Mike, I'm not sure. But basically, Leia stabs her lightsaber into one of the Nogri commando ships and sets off a chain reaction and blows up that ship. And only a few Nogri are left that were already off on the Wookiee planet.
Yeah, that's definitely played out differently in the comics.
And a lot of this is Leia feeling out her force powers. It's not her knowing what she's doing. It's kind of like Empire, Return of the Jedi, Luke for Leia. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But basically, Leia is cornered and speaks to a Nogri who is eventually captured by the Wookiees. I never know how to pronounce his name. Karabaka.
Karabak? Yeah.
And Karabak is the name he goes by, and basically seeing her use the Force with her lightsaber and smelling her, he realizes she is the daughter of Darth Vader.
And this is where I draw the line.
With the Nogri?
Rereading it as an adult, this is pretty bad.
What do you think about the Nogri being indebted to Vader? What do you think about that?
Well, first,
we can talk about it. Let's talk about what it means. So apparently, the Nogri, there was a big battle between the Rebellion and the Empire above the Nogri homeworld. And Vader basically came down to the homeworld and said to them that the Empire could help them. And he kind of manipulated them. Vader did. And he said as long as they served the Empire, specifically him, he would protect their world from future military conquest and battles because there were civilian deaths and things like that. And they're very simple tribal people, even though they're great warriors. And then basically the Nogri felt like they were indebted to Lord Vader at that point onward. And apparently they ran shadow missions for Vader.
There's another layer to it. Their world was decimated by
the battle,
by capital ships crashing into it and poisoning all their
You're
crops
right.
because they were simple farming people. And Vader came down and said, "Your enemies did this. I will protect you if you serve me." When in fact it was like Rebel and Imperial ships, like caused by Vader, essentially, that did this.
And Leia, of course, explains this like, there's no way the rebellion would have done this to your people intentionally. You know what I mean? But basically, they feel like this one Nogri in particular, who's of course in cuffs, has no weapons. He's surrounded by Wookiee bodyguards. He's feeling very honest at this moment. He speaks to Leia, and he basically, long story short, he says, "We need to serve the Lady Vader, the spawn of Vader."
Ugh.
What you don't like about this, Mike?
So he can identify that it's Vader's daughter that he barely knew about by sniffing her hand.
And force powers, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's dumb.
I mean, they're orcs. I don't know how they smell.
Well, and adding to the dumbness, Leia has this fight with Karabakh in her underwear in the comic. Also peak 90s.
What?
Yeah. Like she's ambushed in the middle of the night or something.
She was, but that wasn't said in the book. That's
well,
weird.
it's very explicit in this.
I mean, she probably was in a nightgown or something in the book. I don't know, but that's
I don't know. The
creepy gray skinned guy.
Like, I don't know. The Nogri, like, basically being tricked into slavery under the Empire is totally consistent.
Yeah, with the Empire.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just not.
Now, what do you think about this
anymore.
one guy? What do you think? I think it's kind of cool that this one guy is kind of like, I'll go back to my people until only you exist, but we're still have a mission to capture you. Like, you know what I mean? And she basically makes a deal with him to meet him in a future book, which is going to be in the series, to discuss negotiations where the New Republic would take care of their people and that they would work for her in the New Republic, basically. But they wouldn't have to unless they wanted to.
It's meh. Let's move past it.
But he's the only one who believes her. Like, none of the other Nogri do. So it's kind of, that's kind of the, I don't know. It's the interesting part. But, you know, at this point, we get into the end of the book, which is obviously Leia's safe. Han and Lando find out that Talon had Luke in his custody and that Luke escaped off Talon's ship, and they get really mad at him.
Yep.
And they go down to find Luke on the planet. Luke and Mara, of course, in a series of events, trick stormtroopers and survive and escape off Merkur. And only through Karad's help, right, Mike? He's the one who actually kind of saves them.
Yeah,
He decides to intervene.
He had tried to play both sides, but ultimately is like, well, crap, I kind of have to
very Lando-esque.
Grudgingly go with the New Republic here and let Thrawn be pissed at me.
Yeah. And at the same time, we arrive at the end of the book, which is one final quick space battle that leads right into the next book.
It's a quick space battle, but it's unique because the objective is not destroy the enemy. So we sort of skipped over it, which is fine. Back on Lando's mining colony, Thrawn attacked, stole a bunch of these mole miners, these mining craft. Right. He deploys them under a prototype cloaking shield, and they attempt to actually steal the New Republic fleet. And
the cloaking shield was actually what he found on Jaruus's planet.
Yeah, at Mount Tantus.
Emperor's tech place, yeah.
This was Sluis Van? Is that where this happened?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Sluis Van is one of the major shipyards of the New Republic. And Thrawn, being short on supplies, even though he's brilliant, uses this cloaking device and the mining ships to attack the shipyards, right?
Yeah, and not their goal is not to destroy, but it's to steal. It's to gain a bunch of ships for their own cause. And here we get into like 90s, maybe like even original series
OT.
like Star Trek stuff, where it's like, wait a minute, we know this one code where we can do a thing that'll ruin their plan.
Right. Well, the Falcon shows back up at the battle with Luke and Lando. And
it's Lando who has this plan.
It's Lando who has this plan. I think it's, it is kind of 90s, Mike. You're right. But it's a very Lando moment. Like, Lando's like, those are my ships with my codes and my droid circuits in them that I've designed.
So they really don't have time to do much other than just program them to basically turn all of them on. So these plasma jets that have these mole miners have drilled into these New Republic ships to try to steal them. And instead of being able to steal them, they just burn giant holes through the bridge of these ships. So they're all crippled, basically.
Yeah.
So
it's a loss for Thrawn.
If we can't have them, no one will, is basically what Lando was saying.
Yeah, like Thrawn's taking these Republic ships away, and because he hijacked them with these mole miners, and Lando basically turns the mole miners on, destroys the ships so the Empire can't use them, and then Thrawn and the Chimera and his ships hyperspace out because it's a loss for them, but they didn't really lose any forces, but they failed the mission. And the book ends on the note of Leia calling from Coruscant because she's back from Kashyyyk on Coruscant. And she tells them that Admiral Akbar has been arrested for charges of treason under our Bothan friend.
It's a treason!
Borsk Phalia. So Borsk Phalia has arrested Akbar for treason. Basically, I'm assuming on the events of the storyline, and we're kind of left there. So Mara is away from Luke. Talon is now in a situation where Thrawn's going to come kill him. Thrawn has lost his first failing, but Thrawn obviously has a bigger plan, and Luke is kind of wrestling with what he's learned in this storyline. But that's kind of where we end with this first story. It's kind of the new hope of this trilogy.
And it's a good first act to this trilogy.
Really is. And there's a lot of exposition.
It introduces a lot of new characters pretty well.
It does. It fills them out, and it doesn't really bore you to death. I mean, we learned about Thrawn.
Except with the mole miners.
Pelion.
Get bored. That was
bored.
Bad. That was dad joke.
That's a dad joke
bad
level.
Dad joke territory.
You made it, Mike. You've arrived. You've arrived. You're fully arrived.
So let's hop this back
what do
to
we think about this?
Our questions real quick. So how do the events and characters of this story impact Luke's development? Well, it sets up his first meeting with C'baoth. We sort of glance over the battle at Naklon.
Right.
But that's when C'baoth and Luke first have their Jedi meeting of the minds. And it's not dissimilar to Kylo and Rey, I guess.
True. It's not as
it's not explicitly like touching hands or whatever.
Right.
And seeing
it's more of
each other.
a Luke and Leia thing.
But it's like a half-hour long mental conversation. And the book ends with Luke going off to basically meet up with C'baoth because he's like, oh, hey, it's another Jedi Master. And it's probably too early, I think, to answer our third question. Would Luke's experiences in this story make him different than Luke we met in The Last Jedi? Because it's a 3-book story arc. So
I like Luke in the story, though.
I do too. And
we start off with him revoking his military stuff. He's like, I'm only looking for ways to expand the Jedi. And he's like, where did I go wrong? So he goes to Dagobah. Then he meets Mara, and he's so confused by Mara, her hatred of him. He doesn't know why. It's pretty much the Luke that we love from Legends, and the Luke that I think we're seeing now in the canon.
Yeah.
So
outside of Mara, everything else sort of fits with what we have seen.
Right, exactly. He's exploring Jedi temples. He's trying to learn. He's not part of the military conflict and the conquest of these factions. Notable points in the story, Mike. Luke goes back to Dagobah. Luke has a conversation with Ben. Luke touches the Force with another Jedi, a dark Jedi, but a Jedi, C'baoth. Luke meets Mara, who he thinks might be a Jedi, but he's unsure of. And then, of course, Thrawn has bigger plans for Luke that Luke doesn't know about.
Yeah, and if you read this back in 1991, you had to wait an entire year for the sequel. And this is this is something that would leave you chomping at the bit for the sequel, Dark Force Rising, that we'll talk about next week. Yeah,
the good news for us is you guys will have to wait a week. So,
no, you have to wait a year.
A year, 1 year. But there's a lot to say on the story, Mike. I'm assuming our last episode of this will probably be the most robust with the Luke analysis.
Definitely.
So we'll get there when we get there. But I feel like this week we had a pretty robust analysis of the story. Left out a lot of the good Lando stuff, a lot of the good Jarua stuff. But we gotta focus on our mains, and that's where we are. So Thrawn is back in Rebels. Thrawn is in the Rebels timeline, which is pre-Yavin. So this is 5 years post Return of the Jedi. That's what's interesting to me now, Mike. So Thrawn is canon, but we have not seen. We don't know where Thrawn is.
Thrawn is
Yavin.
dead.
Post Yavin.
Thrawn died before the Battle of Yavin.
Oh God, I hope not.
In my head canon, him and Ezra both died at the end of Rebels because I never want to see Ezra again. And I will accept Thrawn dying if it means never seeing Ezra again.
So it is sad that that's what Thrawn. That's kind of how. He's different and he's not from Thrawn Rebels. Let's ignore the canonical Thrawn books. Let's just look at Thrawn and Rebels.
He shows up in season 3, and there's only 4 seasons of Rebels. So like the first season and a half that we see Thrawn is great.
Yeah,
but
it's really great until the end.
But just the ending with Thrawn, like it's okay that he gets like thwarted,
defeated. It's just a strange way for Thrawn to get thwarted, I think.
It's very Dave Filoni being a bad storyteller. That's right. Being unable to wrap up his own characters that he loves so much.
Or just Rebels shouldn't have been 4 seasons, maybe 5. I don't know. And that might be somebody else's control.
I don't know if they could. I don't know if they could have done a season without Canon.
That's true, but season 4 seemed to really start accelerating out of nowhere, and I was like, "Whoa." It seems like, you know what I mean? Like, could have been a season and a half of stuff rather than half a season. It seemed like the last half of season 4 was like, oh, we're in overdrive now.
That's true. It definitely shifted it into 5th gear with all the space between spaces and all that stuff.
And it's like, hey, we're back on Lothal. Everything's high gear intensity. And it's like, that just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to play out more of the Inquisitor Maul stuff, the Jedi stuff. And then season 5 was going to be all Lothal, but I don't know. But I like Legends Thrawn better than New Thrawn, but I still like New Thrawn a lot, and I like the decisions Zahn's made, especially in the books, even though I've only read the first one, to tweak Thrawn. But we are thinking of Thrawn like 10, 15 years before this point in time.
It's true, and
so it's different.
I've also only read the first Thrawn novel. I haven't read Thrawn Alliances yet.
Yeah, we both needed to read that.
Don't know if I will. And it's not so much that I dislike Legends era Thrawn. I just feel like the Thrawn we meet in Rebels and even through the book is less of the bad guy Mary Sue that's all powerful, all knowing. We actually see him, learn a little bit instead of already knowing everything. And that might just be a function of telling his story in a different time period.
Right. He's also Sherlock Holmes, so I'll keep saying that. And Pelion is Watson.
Is Robert Downey Jr. going to play him in the movie?
You never know. Or even Benedict Cumberbatch. But Pelion is definitely Watson in this too, because even Thrawn, he tells Pelion a lot of the answers and has Pelion reason it out through logic, and Pelion kind of figures it out. A lot of these situations,
While twirling his mustache.
Yeah. No, man, he's swirling that wine, looking at that art. But you're right. Pelion's twirling the mustache, which is, oh my gosh, I just realized Watson has a mustache, man. We're onto something.
I think you actually are onto something there. Good job.
No, I really do think this is a literary nod to Sherlock and Watson, because their relationship is so cool in these books, Mike. The two of those guys. It's actually my favorite parts of these books.
Pelion and Thrawn, and just Pelion himself is cool. Like he does
Pelion
enough.
is awesome.
He does enough to establish himself as a fan favorite that he lasts for several books.
Yeah, spoiler alert, he's last and he's awesome.
I think we're well beyond spoilers for stuff in the 90s at this point.
So we'll explore more Luke stuff in the future, but this is the beginning of this Thrawn trilogy. Enjoy you guys went on the story with us, but let's we got some other stuff to get in this week. I think we should.
So just one quick note, we're going through these a week at a time. If you want to get the overall story and you haven't read this, the comic will get you the overall story. It is not as good as reading the book or listening to the audiobook. But if you're in a hurry, it's better than nothing is what I'm trying to say.
I highly recommend, obviously, the book. But if you're not a book person and you got some drives ahead of you, the 20th anniversary new audiobook is phenomenal. And I've listened to both audiobooks now, and I really like the new one with Mark Thompson. I would recommend that. Just kind of Audible and listen to that. It's different voices for everybody, and you always know where you're at in the story.
Dude, if they listen to that while they're driving, they're not listening to us. Oh no!
Oh no! Yeah. Well, ideally they listen to the next one, Dark Force Rising, before next week.
There we go.
And then us after that.
Yeah, so that wraps up our talk about Heir to the Empire. Let's jump over to news from the HoloNet.
HoloNet News Alert.
So it's been a while since we've had time to actually talk about Star Wars news, and there's a lot of it that has backed up through our, like last week when we had Zach on and whatever book we talked about the week before. The Mandalorian, the Mandalorian, the Mandalorian, the Mandalorian. Holy crap, the Mandalorian. The internet lost its mind about the Mandalorian.
Yeah, we actually found out the name of the show, the premise of the show, pictures from the show. They started filming the show. I mean, a lot of things happened, Mike, in the last couple of weeks when we did basically Mindor, Courtship of Princess Leia, and our special interview with Zach Bunn. So we got a lot to talk about today, I feel like.
Yeah, and all of this information was pretty much given out on Jon Favreau's Instagramming.
Which is awesome. So awesome.
He dropped not quite the official font, like yellow text on black Starfield, but he dropped an image that says, The Mandalorian. After the stories of Jango and Boba Fett, another warrior emerges in the Star Wars universe. The Mandalorian is set after the fall of the Empire and before the emergence of the First Order. We follow the travails of a lone gunfighter in the outer reaches of the galaxy, far from the authority of the New Republic. ...
I've got a quick thought on this. When I first read this, the first thing that came to my mind was, for you guys video game fans out there, Star Wars 1313. If you remember that back in the day.
I'm thinking they drew a lot of visual, at least, inspiration from 1313.
A lot of visual inspiration, and basically 1313 was a Star Wars project they worked on for several years that people were...
Video game project.
Yeah, led to believe it was going to happen, and it never did happen. But they fed us pieces of it over the years, and even gameplay and things like that. And essentially, you were a bounty hunter, smuggler, outlaw, cowboy character in the underworld of Star Wars, which is one of my favorite parts of Star Wars altogether. And you were living in this crime lifestyle, and eventually they revealed in the future that it was a prequel to a Mandalorian storyline. So, people were assuming was a Boba or Jango storyline, but even it wasn't just a Mando storyline. And what's really interesting about this, Mike, as Mike just mentioned, the final screen caps and stuff they showed from 1313 look exactly like the Mandalorian in the show.
Was this the last project that LucasArts was working on before the studio closed?
I think it was, actually.
Yeah, I think that matches up.
But he had the rifle with the leather bandolier, and he had the same color armor and the similar helmet. And I mean, they pulled a lot from that. And it kind of proves to you that nothing in Star Wars ever dies. Legends, abandoned projects, things like that. We just talked about Thrawn and interdictors and all these things being consistent in the new canon. Much more than that, but those are just a few. Nothing ever really dies if they like it. If they like it, right?
Nothing dies, even ice cream makers, because we've gotten a few pictures from the Mandalorian. There's the good one of the brown and silverish armor that we don't know who's playing the Mandalorian. I'd be willing to bet money it's Pedro Pascal, though. I hear he's in Game of Thrones. I know him most from Kingsman 2.
That's fine. Well, I'm going to tie this full circle, Mike. You're not ready for this. So Pedro Pascal plays the Viper in Game of Thrones, which I mentioned earlier, who is the guy that the Mark Thompson, I feel chose to make the audiobook Talon Card voice after. Nice. Kind of a West Spain accent, sultry kind of guy.
We get it. You have a crush on him. I do too. They also released pictures of his rifle, which has the forks on the end of it, matches the old holiday special Boba Fett Dinosaur Hunter cartoon. And there's something that looks like Wilro Hood's ice cream maker,
which we love.
If you don't know who Wilro Hood is, look it up. He's amazing.
Yeah, we've mentioned him several times. We still never told our ice cream story. One day we'll get there, Mike, but Wilro Hood is amazing. You're right. And, very cowboy-esque, a lot of the stuff, which I'm in love with, because I think that's an important part of Star Wars, the Western elements.
And I really love the look of everything. And if you've listened to the past couple episodes, you heard me kind of crap on this for being about potentially Mandalorians on Mandalore. That's not what's described here. We have a gunfighter who has earned
Traveling the galaxy.
The name the Mandalorian. Doesn't mean he is one. And even if he is one, it's not about the Mandalorian, the different houses and internal politics and stuff. It's one guy that's a gunfighter on the fringes of the galaxy. So I'm still excited for this show. And part of what excites me so much is this list of directors that they have lined up.
I agree. I'm glad you're excited now too, Mike. That's good. Because you weren't for a while.
I was still worried. Excited. It was like excited, but like worried. Yeah.
Right. That's your voice saying that, but your internet presence, it seems more scared when you tweet about this stuff.
I tweet angry sometimes. We'll go ahead and stick
provocative.
With that. So the list of directors that we've got, we have 5 directors, and we're assuming 2 episodes each, but we don't actually know. Dave Filoni, who is Star Wars famous and I think is kind of bad. I'm not actually excited that he's kicking things off. I kind of wish Jon Favreau was doing that himself. I know. Are you
not excited about Dave doing live action though in any way?
I'm just not excited about anything Dave Filoni, really. But
see, I'm thrilled about Dave doing live action Star Wars because I feel like, I don't know. I mean, we've had discussion before, but him and Pablo are kind of like the Star Wars minds right now, whether you like it or not.
And I totally agree with that. That doesn't mean you're a good director. And Dave directing has had very mixed results at best. Because
I think it overall lane's good.
The only movie he's directed was awful. Granted, it was animated.
Yeah.
Rebels, I think, tended toward mediocre, and Clone Wars had some good and some bad.
Right.
And he didn't. I know he didn't direct every single one of those, but
no, he was more the creative head.
I knew he was going to get a shot at directing, which I was fine with. I just wish Favreau or somebody else more established was kicking things off.
But this is a way for Dave to do it. We've talked about this before, like not Dave doing a full theatrical film, but him doing something like this first. I think
right, and I'm actually fine with that. But I think it's been said that he's doing the first episode, which is what scares me, because the first episode has to set the tone for everything that comes after. And this is essentially a 10-hour movie.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, I'm super excited about every director on this list. So.
Well, so there's Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, who has done the work I'm familiar with, was Jessica Jones on Netflix, which is my favorite Marvel Netflix series.
Whoa, big words. I like that, though.
What, you think any of the others were better than Jessica Jones?
I think Daredevil Season 1 is much better overall work, but I think David Tennant as Kilgrave is the best villain in the new Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I have a lot of
we'll have to
feelings.
Do a spin-off podcast about the MCU.
And then season 2 of Daredevil is literally just a recreation of Ninja Turtles, and I could do a whole podcast on that. I've written this out.
Oh no. Then we have Rick Famuyiwa, which I know he directed a film called Dope, and I don't think I've seen anything of his. Next we have Bryce Dallas Howard, which is maybe the most surprising name on this list, or at least it was to me. I have no problem with it, although this is her first big directorial debut or challenge or whatever, as far as I'm aware. Like, she's mainly been an actress.
Short films.
I hate that people always well, her dad was Ron Howard, so it's in her blood. Well, no, not necessarily. Someone's dad can be an astronaut and their kid can be, a dumb burger flipper. It doesn't mean that just because your dad is is a legendary Hollywood director that she is going to be a great director as well. Though I'm excited she's getting a chance to prove it. And there's also rumors that she has a part in The Mandalorian. So it would be interesting to see the actor-director crossover. Yeah,
I love her acting, so I'm really interested. You're right, though, but, part of that, Mike, is kind of a cool spiritual tie. We got the Ron's directed Solo now we got his daughter doing
that doesn't actually mean anything.
Miniseries. No, I'm not saying it does, but if it's good, it'll mean a lot.
It won't mean anything. It's two different people.
I mean, it's like if George Lucas' kids were directing movies today. That wouldn't mean a lot, but it would mean something tied to Star Wars. If they were directing Star Wars movies. I don't know. Like, she's done a bunch of short films and stuff, but she's never, you're right, Mike, done a big production. So I'm really curious as well. I'm excited. I think it's awesome.
I am too.
I'm excited to see her directorial debut because she's produced a few short films. She's written a few short films and she's directed a few short films, and that's about it. Other than that, she's acted, of course, in a lot.
Yeah.
We'll come to see.
And then the last name on this list, Taika Waititi. Holy crap. Out of left field. Didn't see it coming. He might actually be voicing a droid in the show, even if he's not and just directing a couple episodes. I love it. Because Thor Ragnarok was fantastic.
You're very right. Let's not forget things he did before that, because I'm a super fan of...
Hunt for the Wilder People.
I was going to say Fly the Conchords.
Oh.
He did a lot of episodes of that. And he's obviously worked with Jermaine Clemens in the future. He did What We Do in the Shadows, which I don't know if you've seen that, Mike, but you should definitely see that.
Well, so I was going to own up to being a bad fan of Taika. Thor Ragnarok is actually the only thing of his I've seen. I've been told What We Do in the Shadows and Hunt for the Wilder People are great. I've just not gotten around to seeing them.
And of course, I think he directed 4 or 5 episodes of Fly the Conchords off the top of my head.
Which I guess I may have seen one of those.
Which is a lot. That's a lot because the show's only 2 seasons. So he developed about 25% of that show, right? So that's quite a bit. And then, of course, What We Do in the Shadows, he worked with Jermaine again from Fly the Conchords, and they co-directed that film together, which I thought was really cool. And Jermaine was in it. And it's a comedy about vampires, which is great. Very good stuff. But you're right. Him being in this, and to the prospect of him in the Star Wars universe on here on out, as a director they can pull.
Yeah.
It's just exciting. It's exciting. Visually creative director. He has a great sense for comedy. He has a great sense for, just everything. Like, I mean, more than just visual comedy, but he knows how to direct actors as well, right? So that goes a long way in Star Wars, and I'm into that.
Yeah. I love that with this group of directors, Star Wars is finally getting more diverse as well. I know we've had a bunch of white dudes directing the films, and I hope that changes at some point, but this is the first step, of having female and directors of color. As much as I would like to see Ava DuVernay direct a Star Wars movie, she's kind of already said that's not for her. So it'll be interesting to see who's next up. Like, if we got, I don't know, like Ryan Coogler somewhere down the line, he has blown up and he is already part of the Disney family. Have him direct
that's right.
Either something in season 2 of The Mandalorian or a standalone movie or something could be great.
I'm into it. And my only pushback on the mic is Kathy is in charge.
But she's not directing and she's a white woman.
You're right. No, she's not directing, but she is obviously a creative and producer head, which is very important. But you're right. I mean, even Dave and Pablo are kind of the writers, creative directors right now. Yeah. But it is interesting to see a lot of actual different directors and, even people like Bryce Dallas Howard who have never been given a shot before. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
It's a bummer we have to wait so long, but I think we'll actually maybe see this before episode 9, right? Isn't this streaming service supposed to hit fall of 2019?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
We'll definitely see this before then.
So let's talk a little bit about Star Wars Resistance, the new animated show.
We've touched on this.
I've seen the first 3 episodes because of the Disney app or whatever. They haven't all actually aired yet. The 3rd one hasn't, but I've actually seen the first 3. The pilot, the 2-parter, The Recruit, The Triple Dark, and Fuel for the Fire, which has Elijah Wood as a guest voice on the show, which was surprising to see.
That's so awesome. Has not the 3rd episode not just aired, Mike?
I looked it up. It's supposed to air this weekend. So if you're listening to us, you can catch Fuel for the Fire on Disney this weekend.
Yeah, I've actually watched the first episode of Resistance. That's all I've seen, Mike. Turns out it's difficult for me to watch the show when I don't have cable or DirecTV or anything. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma. I got to have a friend who has it or stream it or something. And I found an interesting workaround today, which I thought was kind of awesome. I got really excited about it. Katie, my wife, witnessed it. So my in-laws have DirecTV, and they gave us Disney login or something.
Oh, yeah. Into the Disney app or whatever.
So there you go.
You might actually be able to watch the first 3 with that.
So I logged into our Fire Stick, and I downloaded the Disney app and logged in with their DirecTV stuff, and there you go. I had to watch some interesting children's toy ads.
Yeah.
Not the ones that I'm into, like Transformers, but like Disney doll ads, which was great.
Yeah,
And then,
I had to watch those too, so I'm right there with you.
yeah. And then got right into the episode. I really enjoyed the first episode a lot. Turns out Kaz, in my opinion, is a lot less annoying than Ezra.
That's a low bar, but I agree with you.
Like Ezra is like Aladdin on his worst day. And like Aladdin when he was like 10 on his worst day. Kaz is just kind of like, I don't know, he's kind of a plain Jane hero's journey character. He's a little arrogant. He's a little spastic at times. But other than that, he's not really obnoxious like Ezra was.
Yeah.
First couple episodes of Rebels. So, and I actually personally dramatically like the animation of this show a lot better than Rebels. I'm not sure I like it better than Clone Wars. I mean, that'd be something interesting to look at, especially late Clone Wars with this,
or new Clone Wars,
Clone Wars, which is you're right, even a new art style for Clone Wars. But I really like this, Mike. It reminds me of the Team Fortress 2 PC video gaming visual style, cell shading.
Yeah, the best description I came up with was if you had Star Wars done in the style of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and those are pretty similar. That cell shading, cartoony style.
Yeah, Team Fortress 2
and we won't
Breath of the Wild.
We won't spend a whole lot of time recapping every episode of the show.
Nah.
I will say that I like the the animation, the style, and I liked that we've gotten some expansion into the Resistance and First Order. Like we've seen new ships, we've seen T-85 X-wings now. And there's some new First Order officers, like a gold-plated Phasma looking guy and a red TIE Interceptor-ish ship that we're still learning about. Right,
which is another Legends nod, new direction or whatever they want to take it. But I mean, we had Sunterfell and all his men and a lot of the Royal Guard guys that flew TIE fighters as well back in the old Legends storylines that flew red TIE Interceptors. Well, they were modified, so that's interesting.
I could be wrong, but I think there was a character, I've heard this like secondhand, in the Phasma novel called Cardinal, who had like red armor and maybe a red ship, so this might be that character. So that's something for us
filling
to
it
look
out.
into. Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to keep an eye on the show. We're going to talk to you guys about it in the future, but so far, we're really enjoying it. I don't understand the that like bar on YouTube still. I don't get it. That first trailer.
You're right. I don't get that either.
It's bizarre, especially after seeing these first couple episodes.
All right, so that was the good news. Now for the bad news.
I got real bad news, Mike. I actually broke this news to my wife last night, who
I wondered how she would take this.
Is the biggest Chuck Wendig fangirl ever. She's read all of his works. She's spoken with him on Twitter. And he's been nothing but super polite to her and amazing. Me as well, actually. He tweeted me a couple times. So that's my context of the story. When I mentioned that Mr. Bones was one of my new favorite characters in all of Star Wars. And I quoted a piece from the second Aftermath book, and he tweeted at me and retweeted and did some fun stuff like that. But Chuck Wendig is the subject today, and he is the writer of the Aftermath series, and he was actually contracted by Marvel to write a new Vader series, right, Mike?
A 5-issue Vader series and an as yet unannounced Star Wars comic book that we don't know anything about.
He said book.
It was later clarified comic book.
Thank goodness. My heart was hurting too much.
So he might still come back through the publishing arm, like Del Rey or whatever the
right.
He could maybe still write books in the future, but it was later clarified it was going to be Vader and then another comic book.
So this is bad news. We're kind of insinuating what it is, but it's insinuating that Chuck has been fired from Star Wars comics and any future Star Wars comics work.
Boo.
Yeah. So this is Mike looking like a similar to a James Gunn situation, maybe?
It's not a direct comparison, but there are similarities.
Similar. Yeah, the word's definitely similar.
Because Chuck
didn't do anything like James Gunn did.
No, but Chuck was fired for books 4 and 5 of this Vader miniseries, which seems odd to me. Just like let the guy finish it and then don't hire him again. So clearly Marvel was trying to make a statement by firing him. But basically he was fired for his political views / being vulgar and incendiary on Twitter, which if you follow Chuck on Twitter, he absolutely is, but he has always been that way.
That's what Katie said too.
Ever since before he was hired to write Aftermath. And that's the similarity to James Gunn. James Gunn, these tweets were always out there, and there was always context of James Gunn working at Troma and all that other stuff, but it's not like these guys were hiding anything. Marvel should have known what they were getting into when they hired him.
It's really odd.
And then to give in to the Comicsgate alt-right crowd is really just a bad look for Marvel Publishing.
Obviously, I have a fair enough gist on the alt-right crowd, Mike, with the internet swaying stuff, but give me a gist on the Comicsgate. What's that? Because I've heard that language stuff around. I mean, to put you on the spot, but I just...
Well,
as my first hearing it from Chuck, and I'm uneducated.
To put it succinctly, it's people pushing back. I'm doing my best. It's people pushing back on advancing diversity in comics. Be that
so, like Dr. Aphra.
In terms of storytelling and actual employees, female writers, artists, non-binary artists, that sort of thing. It's sort of like Gamergate extended over into comics, which is where it gets the name.
Okay, that makes more sense. Because I know Gamergate.
It's the same group that Ryan Johnson called man babies, these white dudes that didn't like any sort of change or progression. They're just taking it out in comics. And that's not the most nuanced take, but it's a succinct way to.
So we're thinking that they had a strong influence in pushing Marvel's publicity.
So Chuck had been under fire from this crowd ever since he wrote the first Aftermath book.
I'm familiar.
For introducing, gay characters into his books and into
his
Star
writing
Wars.
Style, everything. I mean, he was under attack by.
And this crowd will always claim victim. Well, I just don't like the book. And it's okay to not like a Star Wars story, but when you don't like it because of pushing diversity or things like that, it's more complicated and nuanced than what I'm saying. But basically, if you're if you're not a white dude a-hole in your basement, you're probably okay with the changes that he brought to Star Wars.
Right.
And if you're a white dude a-hole, feel free to tweet at me. I'll fight with you all day.
I think also, Mike, too, to be fair to Chuck and also maybe to be fair to some of these annoying people. I feel like a lot of people's gripes of these Chuck's trilogy was that it didn't forward much of the three, Luke, Han, and Leia.
Absolutely.
And that was nothing we've never seen in a Star Wars book ever, other than a book that maybe focused on one character, like a Mace Windu book or like a Chewbacca book or whatever it was, or a Bounty Hunter book, right? We've never seen that. So I think that paired with Chuck's leanings and Chuck's writing style and Chuck's vocality on Twitter made people go wild. I don't know what they didn't know what to do. They'd never seen something that different. And then the fact that Luke's not in the book, Han's in it briefly, and Leia's not in it at all was just like jarring to people, especially in that first book.
Well, in that first book, it is jarring, but think back.
All new characters.
This book came out before The Force Awakens. Did you really think they were going to give you a prequel to The Force Awakens involving our main cast before the movie came out? No, that's just not, that doesn't make movie sense. The characters he introduced were great. I love a lot of those characters, and some of them, like we got Wedge from the old group, and some
Mon Mothma, and a lot of good stuff.
And in books 2 and 3, there were more of like Han and Leia and Chewie and stuff. But he also introduced gay characters, non-binary characters, which is good for Star Wars, but bad for certain people's worldviews, I guess.
Right.
But your feelings on those books aside, he's been consistent on Twitter since the beginning. It's
bizarre,
often vulgar, no denying that, and he doesn't either. Always hilarious, in my opinion. He's not just vulgar for like vulgar's sake. It's very creative and makes me laugh most of the time. But he's a critic of the orange a-hole, and it's it feels like Marvel Publishing was trying to make some sort of political statement, and I don't really like it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they were doing, honestly, especially being tied to Disney, because Disney's typically leaning in his direction.
Well,
Chuck's direction. So that's not really a thing.
You hear that it was Disney, not Marvel movies that made them get rid of James Gunn.
Right.
And if it was Disney, not Marvel Publishing, that made them get rid of Chuck, that's troublesome, because Chuck said that he thinks this came from Marvel, not from Lucasfilm. As far as he was aware, Lucasfilm was supportive of everything that he'd done.
That's right.
So it's just a sticky, like, crappy situation, because he's a good writer. The Aftermath trilogy, when you get past the fact that it doesn't have Han, Luke, and Leia in it, is actually really good.
Yeah, for sure. Especially book 2 and 3. It's one of those things like judge the trilogy when it's done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and if you read that first book, just with the context of, oh, hey, this came out before The Force Awakens, so he's got both his arms and one leg tied behind his back telling this story. It makes sense.
Let him do anything. Yeah, you're right. So overall, it sucks, but I still love Chuck, and I
hope he gets to write a Star Wars book again.
I agree. And we can just sit on that and continue to read his blog, Terrible Minds. It's really good stuff. He's even got detailed guides on how to write, how to make coffee, how to choose whiskeys. I mean, just awesome stuff. I'm really into all of it.
And if you're like me and you're a fan of creative profanity, follow him on Twitter. It's fantastic.
Just support him, especially right now. But, we'll see where this goes. But that's it with the news today, Mike. Some good and some bad. And obviously, new Star Wars cartoon show, all kinds of things going on right now.
That's right. So before we get into our outro and wrap things up, we're going to announce the winner of our art giveaway. So this person is going to win this Ian McDiarmid autographed Emperor Palpatine art. So the winner of our art giveaway is A.E. Welling for his review that he left us on iTunes. Jesse and I just kind of decided to put the eligible entries in a number generator, and we just picked a random number, and
Love it.
He was the first one to come up as a winner. So we hopefully we've contacted you by now. But if you're listening to this episode and we haven't contacted you, send us an email, and I'll work on getting the prize shipped out to you.
Yeah, and that was, of course, because he submitted a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts for us. And
we did have some other reviews sent in to us. Like, I was a little ignorant when we started this. I thought you could review things on Spotify, but apparently you can't. So we had some sent in like through Facebook and stuff that way. So we did consider all eligible entries like that, but we just put things in a number generator.
Yeah.
Came up with as the winner.
So awesome. So we will do another contest in the future. Thank you guys for those of you that participated. And please continue to give us reviews. That helps us so much. Even if you just give us stars and no written review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts.
We need your validation.
We need it. The more, the better. Helps people find the show, helps us show up in search engines, and, helps us scale the Apple Podcast charts.
That's right. So it's a long episode today, but thanks for sticking with us. Connect with us on Facebook. We got a page there. On Twitter at The Canon Cantina. Instagram at Canon Cantina. We're on your favorite podcast app, and if we're not, tell us and we'll get on there. We're also on Spotify. Spread the word like Jesse was saying, and if you think we can do something better, write a review or just send us an email to canoncantina@gmail.com. I also want to talk about this new project we're working on. We do have a Discord server. We talked about it at the end of our last episode in a little bit of detail, but the link should be pretty easy to find on all of our social media. Basically, Discord is a chat app where you can chat with us, and we're going to try to run a text-based, casual-ish version of the Star Wars role-playing game on there for anybody who's interested in playing. So if you would like to pretend to be a Star Wars character and play in a universe that I come up with, because I'm going to be the game master, connect with our Discord server. We will take as many people as are interested, whether that's one person that gets to play with Jesse or we get, like 15, 20 people. I will figure something out. It'll be a fun challenge. We're not going to make this a hardcore dedicated, like you have to play the game at this time. We're trying to make it more of a casual through the week role-playing game. But if you are a seasoned RPG player and want to join another game, please hop on our Discord server. Or if you haven't ever played an RPG and you're sort of interested in trying this out, connect with us on Discord or anywhere else on social media, and I will help you out. New players are absolutely welcome.
Yeah, let's emphasize that last part, Mike. If you're new at all and you've never done an RPG and never done the Star Wars RPG, we want you the most, actually. Just join the Discord server.
True.
We'll walk you through it. I've only played, I don't know, Mike, I'm trying to think about this, 5-6 sessions of this game, max. I want to play this every week if I could. I would love to play in a campaign for this. And, hopefully, you guys join and we'll teach you. Don't be intimidated at all. Don't be intimidated. We're going to make this fun and easy and simple.
Yeah, I have been a GM game master for this system for several different campaigns for all sorts of new players, experienced like D&D players coming over, or just people totally new to RPGs. So we will make it fun and accessible for you if you want to have a Star Wars adventure with us.
Definitely. That's it for today, guys. If you guys want to join us next week, please do. We will be covering the second part of the Thrawn trilogy called Dark Force Rising. So if you guys can pick up that book or the audiobook of Dark Force Rising, we'll see what happens with our characters next with Luke, Mara, Thrawn, and what sort of things are going to happen to our smuggler characters as well, Han, Lando, and Talon, and Leia, and Chewbacca, of course, and the droids. And what's going to happen with Admiral Akbar now that he's, been arrested for treason? All these sorts of good questions. We're going to leave you guys with this. And next week, we're going to return right into this. This is something we don't normally do every week. We normally jump between canons and legends, but this is a really important time. It's one of the most important storylines in Star Wars, and really want to have you guys with us every week as we go through the story. So it's clear cut. And Luke's arc makes sense as well.
That's right. We have a big old block of legends coming for you. Thanks for joining us today here in the Canon Cantina. Cheers, everybody.
May the Force be with you.
Boring conversation anyway.